Let's get cooking. Welcome back to the Science of Taste series for our final episode, brought to you by the Academy of Edible Sciences and Ethno-gastronomy here in San Diego. I'm your host and executive director, Chef Meg. Thanks for joining us. For our final episode today, we're going to be talking about the science behind flavor pairings. So we're going to bring together some of the things that we discussed earlier in the episodes, beginning from the very first one, when we looked at the science behind how do we taste and those different taste receptors and taste profiles. First, we taste testers here. Let's go through the process of how we're going to revisit that today, talking again about how can we actually pair ingredients based on not only those flavors and flavor pairings, but also on the science behind that, those aromatic compounds that our taste receptor cells and our olfactory receptors, our smelling receptors, are able to perceive and judge. Now, we said back in the very first episode that our perception of taste depends on those receptor cells and the environment in which they operate. For example, if I drank a cup of just straight vinegar, that would be really repulsive and pretty disgusting. However, if I added a lot of sugar into that mixture and then tried it again, I'd find that it's a lot easier to taste. There's a balancing of those flavors in a sense. What's interesting though is that the pH, or the concentration of the hydrogen atoms in the solutions, has not changed whether we added the sugar. So it's interesting to know the science behind something, but also our perception of the environment in which these ingredients are coming together and the means of that happening. So let's go to the whiteboard and just talk a little bit more about the science behind ingredients and flavor pairings themselves. All right, bringing it back to the first episode and our different tastes that we can perceive. We said they're sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and then we brought in that fifth, umami. And we also discussed whether or not there is a sixth, and said that that perhaps could be the perception of fats. And we also said maybe even spicy could be another taste for our taste receptor cells. So looking at these different tastes, general tastes that we perceive, there are two different ways of being able to pair them. One is in a complementary way. Think sweet and salty, right? They complement each other. Maybe salty pretzels with chocolate, covered in chocolate, right? That's a sweet pairing with salty that complements each other well. It brings out different flavor profiles in each other. So I have some examples of how we can complementary pair these different tastes. We can also see that sour and spicy complement each other, that umami and fat complement each other, etc. Now, when it comes to balancing our different tastes and flavors, this is kind of the opposite of complementary. So we have opposing tastes. For example, sweet and bitter. If we have maybe a sauce that's really, really sweet, then we can balance that by using an opposing taste, such as bitter. Or fat and spicy are balancing flavors. Fat and sour can be balancing flavors. So not only when we're creating a dish, we can think about these different tastes and how we can complement them, but also as we're cooking and adjusting those flavors, say we accidentally add a little too much salt or whatnot, then there's different ways that we can rebalance those flavor profiles and mixture together. So that's a little bit about pairing those tastes, but we can also pair flavors themselves, all right? And I have a few examples for you here. but there's many different flavors out there beyond just these three as an example. So I have floral, and any floral flavors are coming from very similar plants. Now, these are plants that in their life cycles will have a flower at some point. Okay, so it's a flowering plant. And because of that, because they have even a genetic disposition that they share, they're going to have some similar flavor profiles in there. Okay. So for pairing foods with something that will have a floral note to it, these are some of our best pairings for this flavor. So we have berries, dairy, earthy notes, tree fruits, tropical fruits and flavors, and even certain pungent flavors are going to pair very well with something that has a floral note to it. Also, we have savory. So what will pair well with savory? Caramel notes. So that goes kind of to our Maillard reactions, right? From our episode where we talked about creating that crust on the steak in a Maillard reaction. So those savory, like meaty, savory flavors pair well with those notes, those caramel notes. We even have meaty on here. Marine, so seafood and savory are flavors that go well together. Tree fruits and savory pair well together. Melon, tropical. So some of these we have some shared pairings, some shared flavors, right? Tree fruits, savory, and floral notes to it. And then if we move down to fruity as well, we're going to see tree fruits on there again. Examples of tree fruits are going to be peaches and nectarines, which is actually one of the fruits that we're going to be using in a dish that we're going to create later today, are some fresh peaches locally here from San Diego. But for our fruity, again, some of those flavors that pair well: floral notes, berry, nuttiness, roasted notes, and even woody flavor profiles all pair well with a fruity flavor. So when we're creating a dish, we can work in different directions. We can either start with one ingredient and then find other ingredients that will pair well with them, which we'll get to in just a minute, how we're going to do that. And then from there, we can pair these ingredients based on their flavor profiles, whether they have more floral note to them or fruity note to them. And then from there, also look at how can we balance these flavors out. Okay? So pairing foods, flavors, ingredients, it's truly an art and a science in itself. And today we have a really special guest. He is a local food scientist that's going to talk to us a little bit more about what he does and how he works with both chefs and scientists in creating new food products locally. Now we have with us today a local food scientist, Matt Stinson. Welcome, Matt. You were with us on the first episode where we got to do some taste testing fun. So we're glad to have you back on the show now, talking a little bit more about the science behind these different flavors and how we can maybe pair them together. So please tell us a little bit about what you do in your background.
Yeah, so I'm a product developer. I started kind of as an engineer, and then I just was passionate about food, and so eventually I kind of transitioned into product development. And so we kind of focus on the science of food and making sure we can have products that last through shelf life. And so it has a kind of a unique combination with both the scientists and also chef collaboration. So we're kind of the merging of those two. And
very cool.
Yeah.
How often is it that you might find someone that has a background for both, like the chefs that really know more of the science behind some things, or the scientists that like really care about the food profiles and or foodies?
I think the best product developers definitely have background in both. So the people that have science, but also are passionate about the food, and then you always have those resources available. So if those scientists can spend the time up front with a chef and kind of talk about flavors and
Right.
How to use spices and things like that, I think is really
Right.
a benefit. So.
Well, and when we're talking about designing a food product or designing a dish even, it's not just about the flavors, obviously. We want it to be there. You want the customer to enjoy what they're eating and really like it and, want to go back and buy more. But especially if you're designing some food that needs shelf life, like you said, and needs to be able to last for a while on the shelf and have that longevity, then there needs to, I'm sure, have some science behind that as well in the development.
Yeah.
Right?
A lot of products on the market, you'll see, shelf lives, they have to last about 9 months to a year. So that takes a lot of, getting a lot of the properties right. And then a lot of times you'll see things like natural flavors. So natural flavors are really designed to kind of give you that, those aromas and those flavors for more of an extended period of time. So that's really where kind of the collaboration with scientists. There's actually a job called a flavorist. So these are like, think of like a sommelier for wine.
Yes.
They do the same thing for flavors. So they know which compounds really help kind of boost flavor. So you talked a little, I know you were going to talk a little bit about olives and.
Yes, and the aromatic compounds that are with olives. And interestingly enough, so the aromatic compounds, that's a little bit of the organic chemistry behind it, but those are the ones that we can actually smell, and so there's going to be even more of like a taste profile to them. But there's other compounds that go into eventually the flavor of things, and those are called like volatile compounds. I'm not sure if you've heard of volatile compounds, but that's just any compound that's going to move into the air, okay, and be perceived through the air. So even water is a volatile compound. However, it's not necessarily an aromatic compound. Right? So what we are going to be doing is basing a dish around one ingredient. And in this case, I chose olives. So the type of olive that I chose is called Frescatrano olives, and it's an Italian olive, but it has not only that like salty brininess quality to it, but they're also a bit sweet and even a little buttery. So choosing a type of olive and its own exact flavor profile, when you look at what its aromatic compounds are under a microscope, then you can also find what other ingredients share those same aromatic compounds. And one ingredient that has 70% of the same aromatic compounds found within it is stone fruit. So I've got some local peaches, and we're going to begin to shape a dish in a few moments here based all around olives and looking at the science of what will pair well with it and shape a dish.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yes,
I think learning about those compounds, it's pretty amazing to see that different things in nature kind of share those compounds, and so you can actually enhance a dish by pulling kind of similar compounds, similar profiles from another product. And it kind of brings me to kind of the history of kind of flavors, and actually vanilla is the first ingredient that scientists actually kind of isolated the compound that helps enhance the vanilla flavor, and that was one of the first compounds that scientists started to use to kind of enhance vanilla. And vanilla today, because it's all kind of mostly comes from Madagascar, and there was actually a big storm several years ago that decimated a lot of vanilla crops, so there wasn't enough vanilla for the world. So really, that was really important. If we wanted to keep all these products on the market with vanilla flavors, we had to figure out a way to kind of replicate those compounds. So it's kind of cool. That's kind of the history of vanilla. But
yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, vanilla, when I think of vanilla, I think of baking. So many people use it in sweet, foods, but it really can pair really well with savory foods and other things. So looking at the science and the compounds themselves within the vanilla, you can pair that well. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
We're
going to continue on with our dish with our olives and building what we're going to pair with our dish today. using spice. So our dish today for our final episode is going to be based around those Frescatrano Italian green olives. And I pulled up what is called the flavor matrix for olives. And a flavor matrix is based on a book that's out there that I read and think is amazing, and it's called The Flavor Matrix by James Briccione. And this book is pretty amazing because it brings together the science behind some major ingredients. And for example, one is olives, and I chose olives to build a dish around today. Now, the flavor matrix that I drew today for the olive is a simplified version of the more complicated one that is found in the book, The Flavor Matrix. But for this one, I focused on just a few flavor profile elements, a few ingredients that pair high on the level with olives. And what this means is that these ingredients share a high percentage of those aromatic compounds that are found in other ingredients. For example, stone fruit shares 70% of aromatic compounds with olives. So we're going to pair our olives with some stone fruit today. And I have that under our fruity category. So we have peaches, nectarines will pair nicely as well. Even melons are pretty high on that list, and citrus. So those are components that we could add in and would pair nicely with olives. Now, some other flavor pairings that will pair not only with the olives, but this fruitiness is floral notes. And higher up on those ingredient lists, pairing with the olives, includes chamomile, hibiscus, we have lavender on here, and even honey. So today I actually did pull some chamomile out. We're going to use some chamomile and some honey, actually even a little bit of lavender as well, that we're going to pair in with our dish, with our olives. When it comes to spice notes that pair really nicely with olives, we have on here juniper berries, fennel seed, and tarragon as an herb. So we're going to use all of those as well in our dish today. And in terms of a preparation, Maillard reactions or meatiness and nutty notes pair really nicely with olives. So again, that's how I'm going to build my dish from there, is starting with the olive itself, looking at our flavor matrix, what ingredients pair best with it based on the shared science, the shared aromatic compounds, chemical compounds found within those foods. And then from there, we're going to take those ingredients and we're going to make sure that we pair the flavors nicely and the tastes as we build. So let's get cooking. So for our dish today, based all around the olive, we are going to be making an olive tapenade. It's going to pair with our tarragon, and that will go on top of some lamb skewers that will add several different spices into the mix and sear them in a cast iron pan. And we'll put those on top of just a simple spicy arugula salad with a peach vinaigrette. All right, well, let's start with our lamb skewers. So I have some ground lamb. This is New Zealand grass-fed ground lamb that's produced by Neiman Ranch, which is a wonderful brand. And what I'm going to add into our mix is some of those spice notes that we said pair really well with olive. And one of those was our fennel seed. So I'm going to add 3, maybe 4 teaspoons of fennel seed, and this is 1 pound of lamb, by the way. Some juniper berry, and this is ground up juniper berry. And I'm going to add again maybe 2 to 3 teaspoons of the juniper berry, and also some lavender pairs nicely. So let's add a little bit of lavender into there, and just a little bit of sea salt, 2 teaspoons, a little bit of black pepper. And I'm just going to mix this up. And then we're going to skewer our lamb. And I've soaked some skewers in just some water. This helps when you're either putting it on top of a grill or on top of a pan, that the wood itself will not catch and burn so easily because it's you soaked it through a bit. Easy technique. All right, so just going to incorporate our spices and some salt and pepper in with our lamb. Next, I'm just going to take a skewer and a chunk of our lamb and just gonna form our lamb down the skewer and kind of flatten it a little bit as I go, like so. And I'm just gonna do the same for a few more skewers here of our lamb and then leave it on the plate there to take to the stovetop. Next, let's make our olive tapenade. So let's take maybe half of our jar of our Frescatrona olives. Maybe about a dozen. And we're just gonna chop these up, put them into a bowl. All right, we have our olives chopped up. And you can chop these as fine or as large as you like. And also into our tapenade, what we're going to add is some sardines, just a few. And if you don't like sardines, then you can omit this. No problem there. But I love them. I'm gonna take 2. We're gonna chop that up and also add that in to our bowl. Okay, sardines going into the bowl. And the herb that I chose that pairs nicely with olives is tarragon. So I'm going to take maybe 4 or 5 stems of tarragon and chop those up and add them into the bowl. Next, I'm going to add just a little bit of lemon zest into our bowl, but really any citrus, a little bit of zest will do well. And then lastly for a tapenade is I'm going to add some olive oil in here. I don't need to add any salt. From the olives and the sardines, we have enough saltiness in there. And we mentioned earlier some of those complementary flavor pairings. So salty and fat pair really nicely together. And I'm going to add some of that olive oil in there. This is our fat component, which we will also get from the fat in our lamb. And we'll just combine that together. Let those flavors merge and let that sit and rest as we make our vinaigrette. What we have left is our peach vinaigrette. So I'm gonna make mine in the blender today. And what we will do is start with 1 peach. We're just gonna cut off. And this is a pretty high-powered blender, so I can keep this pretty large chopped. Chop those up a little bit. Put that in. I'm going to add a little bit of honey. Maybe half a tablespoon of honey. Some vinegar. Chose sherry vinegar, but any other vinegar will go nicely. 1/4 cup of vinegar. Squeeze some lemon in here, a little bit of juice of a lemon. I'm also going to add our chamomile in here. So I have 3 teaspoons of ground chamomile and dried chamomile. And a few teaspoons of salt. I'm going to start with maybe a 1/2 cup of olive oil. Put that on in the blender and then add some additional olive oil as it's spinning to help form that vinaigrette in suspension a little bit better. We'll start with half of our olive oil in there. Start it up in the blender. Our vinaigrette is made, so all that's left is to cook our lamb. Okay, we've got a hot cast iron pan here, ready to go for our lamb skewers. Just gonna add a little drizzle of olive oil in here. Okay. And this lamb has a pretty high fat content to it, so you don't need a ton of oil, just enough so that it doesn't stick too much. And I'm gonna place our skewers right in the pan. These lamb skewers aren't going to take very long either, since it's ground lamb, probably just a minute or two aside. All right, our lamb looks ready to pull off the heat. Take our skewers out of the pan. Now it's time to plate our dish. So let's start with a little bit of arugula and watercress on the flavor matrix for olives pairs really nicely as well, but today I'm using some arugula as a peppery flavor to it. We're gonna add that into our bowl here. Fresh arugula. Then we're going to drizzle over our peach vinaigrette that we made, that we added a little bit of chamomile flower into, our dried chamomile. So we're gonna see how this tastes all together now. Now I'm just gonna pop our lamb skewers right on top. A very fragrant lamb is always a meat that as the fat is rendering down, you can smell it cooking down. Delicious. And we're gonna add on top our olive tapenade that we added some chopped sardines into, and some tarragon, a little bit of olive oil, and some lemon zest. Nice steam portion. Top of our skewers. Also got a little bit of micros, just more so for plating. And a nice finishing salt that I chose today. This is a Hawaiian sea salt that has some passion fruit infused into the salt. Because when we were looking at some of those flavor profiles, we saw that tropical and the stone fruit pair nicely. I'm just gonna add a little bit of that finishing salt right on top. And here we have our finished product. Our dish that's all based around olives and using some science behind what ingredients and flavors are gonna pair nicely with that. So all that's left to do is taste test, which of course is our favorite part. So I'm gonna take just a little bit of the lamb off the end here. Make sure that I get every component of the dish, so that I can really taste it and give you my best honest opinion. It's really lovely. It's unique that I can taste instantly the brininess of the olives, that finishing salt with the lamb, and the other really interesting components in here is the rub that we put in with the lamb, those spices. I can taste the lavender, and that was really the only ingredient that I was a little nervous about. I don't know, I'm putting lavender into this rub, but maybe it'll turn out really nicely. And I think it's excellent. It's a lot more florally of a dish than I was maybe anticipating, but they all do come together quite nicely. And it's a unique dish. I'm glad that we chose this path of forming a dish today. This was a really interesting experience for me as well, to approach creating a dish from a little different of an angle today. I don't always start with just one ingredient. Sometimes I may, but usually it's not as obscure or small portion of the dish as olives may be, but beginning to pair it from there with other complementary flavors and the shared aromatic compounds, I find it really, really interesting. And really there are endless combinations of flavor pairings and ingredients to pair and play with. So this science meets food has been a really interesting experience for all of us involved. Thank you for joining us on this interesting series of The Science of Taste, and please join us online. You can find more on our food and science-based curriculum at aese.education. We look forward to hearing from you and seeing you in the future, and thanks to all of those involved in producing this series. We truly couldn't have done it without you. Please continue to follow us and the new partnerships and collaborations that we're making with ACE, and we'll be seeing you in the future very soon.